This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
Good afternoon, everyone. Shalom Aleichem. As we continue on our journey in the Lamed Tes Malachos, we are doing Malacha number 19. Oreg Shnei Chutin, weaving two threads. Malacha number 19. And we welcome everybody who's joining us today. And weaving is not one of those malachos that are commonly employed. Many people have never even seen a loom. But it's important to know the principles regardless, and some of them apply to instances where a woman may want to braid her hair or other such types of activities. So the next step in the process of producing cloth for the curtains of the Mishkan was weaving. Once the vertical warp threads are prepared on the loom, the weaver begins passing the thread perpendicularly over and under the warp threads to create the cloth. So the threads that went horizontally are called the weft or the waft. Okay, so the vertical threads are called the shasi, and the horizontal threads are called the erev. Now, says the Rambam. The Rambam says in Hilchos Shabbos, Parak Tes, Halacha Yud Ches, Halacha Yud Zayin, the Rambam says, Derech ha'orgin, it is the manner of weavers, Shemoischin hachutin tchila, that first they stretch the thread, ba'orech ha'yariya, to the length of the size of the cloth that they're looking for, uverachva and its width, Ushnai moichzen zeh mikan v'zeh mikan. Two of them are holding on to the cloth. One guy on one side, one on the other. And as they're stretching out the cloth, somebody's hitting the cloth, ala chutin, umesakin oisan, and they're fixing it zeh b'tzad zeh, one on the side of the other, ad sheteyasa kula shasi b'loy aref, until the whole area is filled up with the warp. The warp is the vertical threads, without the erev, without the weft or the waf. Now, umesichas hachutin, the stretching out of the threads, kedar ha'organ, the way weavers do. He hansachas hamasachas is the mounting of the threads. V'zeh ha'meisech nikra meisach. The one who mounts the threads is called, he set the warp. Uchshekoiflin oisa, and when he bends it, umascha lahachnes hashasi ba'erev, and he begins to put the woof between the warp, nikra oreg, that's called weaving. So in other words, the first thing you have is the shasi, and the shasi is the vertical, and then you put in the erev, which is the horizontal. Fine. The Rambam then says, V'chein ha'oreg shnei chutin b'roichav shtei atzvos chayev, one who weaves two threads, a width of 2 fingers is chayev. Bein sha'aragan betchila, whether you wove it in the beginning, bein sha'yimixas abeged oreg v'aragala oreg, and or even if, let's say, part of the garment was already woven and you merely add on to it, Shiur shnei chutin, the shear is 2 threads. V'im arag chut echad, if let's say you wove 1 thread, v'hishlam b'lay habeged, and that was, in other words, let's say the garment was 99.9% complete, and you're only missing 1 thread. So even though the Rambam says you're only chayev for weaving if you weave 2 threads, however, if it's the final thread that's missing, you would be chayev. Halamazah doime, what is it similar to? La'oireg tziltzul katan, one who weaves a thin belt, beroichav shloisha batenirin, the width of 3 frames. Okay, and then the Rambam says a tolda of the malacha is one who straightens the threads or separates them during the process, is a tolda of weaving, or one who braids hair. That's a derivative of weaving. We're going to see what kind of hair we're talking about. Perhaps it's only hair that's not attached to the head. And the minimum amount which you're chayav for braiding is 2 finger breadths long. Fine. There are no isurei d'rabbanan associated with this. Now, let's define what is the minimum amount of threads you need to weave in order to be chayav. Okay, let's see who's on the share today. Anyone want to offer their opinion? Take a guess. How many threads do you need to be chayav? 2. Reb Baruch in Forest Hill says 2. What do you say, Alan? You look like you want to have... Alan says 1. Okay. The answer is you're all right. It depends. And that is, Rabbi Lezer says that if you weave 3 threads in the beginning of a garment, you're chayiv. 1, if you weave 1, which is an additional 1 to part of a garment, you're chayiv. So Rabbi Lezer says for starters it has to be 3, in addition to what was already there 1. And the Chachamim say it doesn't matter if it's starters, if it's finishers, it's 2 threads you're chayiv. Now who do we paskin like? We just read the Rambam paskins like the Chachamim, that regard whether you're weaving in the beginning or you're adding on to something that was already woven, the Rambam says you're chayiv for 2. That's why the Rambam says, V'chein ha'oreg Shnei Chutin b'roichav shtei atzvos chayiv. One who weaves 2 threads, a width of 2 fingers, you're chayiv. Bein sha'argam b'tchila, whether you wove them in the beginning, bein sha'hi miktsas ha'beged oreg, if part of the garment was woven, v'orag al ha'oreg, or you added to it, it's 2 threads. Now, the Rambam adds one thing, that if it's the final thread of the garment, then you'd be chayiv even for 1 thread, like Alan said. Now, let's talk about this shiur that we're paskening like, that it's a minimum of 2. What is the logic of that? That you're chayiv for a minimum of 2 threads. I mean, a garment has hundreds, if not thousands, of threads. What exactly are you accomplishing by adding 2 threads? So Yeshua Yaakov says, by adding 2 threads, you're giving great benefit to the body of the woven fabric, because this is a solid foundation to continue weaving. And if you add 2 weft threads, you've strengthened all the warp threads. Fine. Then the Gemara in Shabbos says as follows, that if somebody writes 1 letter and he finishes the Sefer Torah, or if one threads 1 thread, he weaves 1 thread, then and he finishes the garment, you're chayiv. So who does this go like? So Rava Bar Rav Huna says, it's Rabbi Lezer who says that if you add 1 thread to something that was already woven, you're chayiv. However, Rav Ashi says this even goes like the Chachamim. Granted, the Chachamim say you're only chayiv if you weave 2 threads, but that's in somewhere in the middle of the garment. But if it's the final thread, then even if you just weave 1 thread, you're going to be chayiv. Now, here's an interesting point of Eon. So we're saying that everybody would agree that if you just weave 1 thread and it's the final thread of the garment, you're chayiv. Are you chayiv for weaving? Or maybe you're not chayiv for weaving, you're chayiv for makeh b'patish, the final blow of a garment. Are you chayiv for weaving, or are you chayiv for makeh b'patish? So the Meiri says if you write 1 letter and you finish a sefer, or you weave 1 thread and you finish a garment, you're chayiv, because anytime it's the final blow, then it's considered like 2. So the Sasema says that the implication is that what are you chayiv for? You're chayiv for makeh b'patish. You're chayiv for making the garment. Now in that case, even if you didn't write 1 letter, or even if you didn't weave 1 thread, even if it's half a letter or half a thread, if you completed the sefer or you completed the garment, you're chayiv for makeh b'patish. You're not chayiv for weaving or writing. You're chayiv for completing. So if you're completing, even if it's not 1, even if it's a half. However, the Meiri writes that when you write a letter, it's considered writing. So it seems that you're chayiv for writing, and in that case, it's only if it's a complete letter. And you're chayiv for weaving, and in that case, it's only if it's a complete thread. Now, let's talk about braiding strands of hair. Is braiding raise your hand if you braid strands of hair. Alright, so we have men here. They don't even know what braiding is. Braiding, you take basically 3 threads or more, and you interweave it. So there's no... Rabbi Baruch, I knew I could count on you. Where are you?
Right here.
Rabbi, you were in the beginning. You're going from the beginning to the end. That was a good trick. Okay, but ponytail, right? So you take basically You have 3 threads. You go one. You take the one that's all the way on one extreme, and you put it over the one next to it, and then you take the one that's on the other extreme, you put on the one next to that, and you go back and forth and back and forth. So it's not perpendicular, but it's something like weaving. The Rambam says that it's a tolda of weaving. The Rambam says, "V'chen hakoilea sanim," and one who braids strands of hair. This is a derivative of the malacha of weaving. And the minimum amount that you're chayav for is 2 fingers breadths. The Mishnah in Masechta Shabbos on Daf Tzadi Daled Amud Beis discusses a woman braiding her hair on Shabbos, and the Mishnah says, "V'chein hagoidelas," if a woman braids her hair, or hakoichelas, if she paints her eyes, v'chein hapoikeses, or if she applies blush, Rebbe Lezer is mechayev, and the Chacham say it's a d'Rabbanan. Someone talking? Somebody wants something? Okay, I'm muting because I'm just.
Yeah, when you make a ponytail, you're not usually braiding. You're just pulling it in a bunch when you're making a ponytail.
Oh, that's true. Right. I don't, Baruch, you don't mean a ponytail. You mean braids in the back of the hair. Ponytail, you're not doing anything really, right? You're just putting a rubber band around, you're bunching up the hair and you're putting a rubber band around it. So,
Why is painting the eyes considered braiding then?
it's not. It's just, these are a bunch of different activities that women do. Rebbe Lezer says you're chayiv, and the Chachamim say it's only a d'Rabbanan. It's not a d'Rabbanan. It's not, what?
I thought we were talking about braiding, so you're saying they're chayiv. They're chayiv for what then?
We're not. What are you chayiv for? I don't know. It's maybe painting, maybe coloring, maybe dyeing. But we're just going to focus on the braiding. So the Gemara discusses what are you chayiv for braiding, painting, and blushing. Goideles, the Gemara says misham ma'reges. Goideles, you're chayiv for weaving. So Amar Rabbana kamed Rabbi Avo v'chiderach ariga b'kach. What do you mean you're chayiv for weaving? Is it the derech to weave by braiding? Ela Amar Rabbi Avo ledidi mifar sheli miunei Rabbi Yisrael Chanina goideles upaikeses, braiding her hair or applying blush. You're chayiv for building. So the Gemara says you're chayiv for braiding your hair, one's hair. You're chayiv for building. Says Tosfos. What's the Gemara asking? Is it the derech to braid that way? We know that braiding strands of hair is weaving. So we see that braiding hair is weaving. Braiding, the Gemara said earlier, braiding strands of hair is weaving. So why is the Gemara asking that? How could you say braiding one's hair is weaving? It's not the derech to braid that way. It's not the derech to weave that way. Says Tosfos. Here we're talking about a woman's hair. You don't weave a woman's hair like you weave a garment. Also here in this case, it's going to be undone. It's going to be woven, and therefore it's oimedas listira, you're not chayav for weaving. So basically, Tosfos is coming out that weaving the hair of a woman, weaving a person's hair, braiding a person's hair, is not weaving. It's only building. So the Shulchan Aruch explains you're not allowed to braid a woman's hair. Says the Mishnah Berurah, you know why? Look in the Mishnah Berurah, the top right hand page of page 6. V'nei kol zeh b'mechubar. It's only weaving if the hair is attached to the head. But v'hakoilas seyar pe'anachar, someone who braids a sheitel, after ein b'zeh mishum boina. Now, so basically braiding hair that's attached to the head is building. Braiding hair of a sheitel is weaving. Mishnah Berurah says, "After ein b'zeh mishum boina asar hakavana mishum oreg." The after nema the ein soif laskayim. Even though, what do you mean? The Tosfos said that it's eventually going to come out. Al kapanim midrabanan it's asar. Okay, so here is the sort of the practical. I wouldn't call this one so practical, but really trying to get to the essence of the malacha, basically we have two things. Let's see who we got today. We have weaving, and weaving, you're taking threads, you're passing the weft threads through the warp threads, and you're creating fabric, and that's the malacha of weaving. And then you have the malacha of sewing, refers to taking two different materials and attaching them together, stitching them together. What about embroidery? What's embroidery? Embroidery is basically, it's not weaving, you're not creating fabric. It's not sewing, you're not attaching two fabrics together. Embroidery is creating a design on something that's already a fabric. Let's say you bought a $5 shirt in China. I take that back. You bought a cheap shirt for 5 cents in China. But, you're not going to be anybody where you live, so you want to have somebody embroider onto your clothing a nice emblem or insignia of a designer company. And this way, people will give you some respect. You'll put a polo symbol or one of these other nonsensical simanim on the shirt to indicate that you didn't pay $5, which even that would have been overpaying for what it cost to make this shirt. You paid $59 on sale for that shirt. What is embroidery? Is embroidery weaving? Well, weaving, I'm not creating fabric by attaching the warp and the weft. Oh, is it sewing? I'm not attaching two fabrics together. So what exactly is embroidery? Is it weaving? Is it sewing? So in your holy booklets, he brings that there are, from Mincha Nechaina, that there are many malachas that fall under the category of weaving. So, Bichlal Oisa Malacha Klei Asaris, including the malacha of braiding here, L'Shem Asiyas Tzama, is braiding here into a braid, Srigas Puzmekais, making socks, Garbayim, or stockings or socks, or tikkunim, or fixing them, Avoidois Rikma Lamina, or embroidery. So included in weaving is embroidery. The Mincha Nechaina says that regarding the malacha of unraveling, that the malacha includes separating and unstitching a piece of woven fabric or removing embroidery. So embroidery, according to the Mincha Nechaina, is part of weaving. Interesting. Even though, as we said, it doesn't really meet the bill of weaving. I mean, would you say it's weaving? It's not really weaving. You're not creating fabric. And you're not producing fabric. Is that an important part of weaving? Comes the Rambam. The Rambam says that braiding goat here is weaving. He says, Oreg. Comes the Pri Megadim, and the Pri Megadim asks, but the Rambam says that if you twist threads to make rope, it's not weaving, it's tying. So we got a stira in the Rambam. The Rambam says if you braid strands of hair, it's weaving, and the Rambam else says if you twist thread to make rope, it's tying. Comes the Pri Megadim, and the Pri Megadim says the answer to this question is that when you twist fine thread, that's weaving. And that's the derech of ariga. But if it's thicker threads, that is not weaving, that's tying. So it depends on the relative thickness of the thread. If it's fine and you twist it, it's weaving. If it's thicker, it's tying. Aruch HaShulchan makes the same distinction. The Aruch HaShulchan says another similar question. He says, twisting and twining is not shaykh on thicker ropes. It's only shaykh by Chutin dakim, and therefore it's not tying. Now, ultimately, they asked Reb Chaim Kanievsky, in his opinion, what would he consider embroidery? And Reb Chaim Kanievsky said it should be weaving. But some wanted to challenge and say, no, how could embroidery be weaving? And the question was raised from a Gemara in Yuma Ayin Beis and Beis. Listen to this Gemara. The Gemara says, Masei roike, masei choshev. They say the Mishkan's curtains were the work of an embroiderer and the work of a designer. Amr Lezer, sharoik min b'makom shechoshven. They embroidered the area they designed. Tana mishmei Reb Nechemia, roike masei machat. Embroidery is needlework, and therefore it's the same on both sides. Lefikach parts of echad. Choshev, design is ma'aseh oreg. Lefikach shnei partzufos. So the Gemara says there's something called roikeim, embroidery, and there's something called oreg, weaving. So clearly embroidery is not weaving, no? Isn't that a good proof? Doesn't that say black and white that embroidery and weaving are different? What do you say, Reb Nassim? It looks like you have some extra time on your hands. Maybe you want to embroider something, maybe you want to weave something. But this Gemara, no thanks. Okay. What? Yeah, but I think the point that they're making to Reb Chaim is the Gemara says there's Masei Roikim and Masei Choshev. Masei Roikim is one partsav, and Masei Choshev is Oreg, and it's Shnei partsufai. So that means there's embroidery and there's weaving. So Reb Chaim said very simple that the Gemara considers embroidery machat and not weaving, but that's in terms of its skill. But in terms of how you label it for Yisurei Shabbos, Reb Chaim says it would fall under the umbrella category of weaving. However, in the sheets over here, he brings down from the Sefer Taras HaMalachos and the opinion of Rav Nissim Karelitz and Rav Meir Bransdorfer that embroidery is not weaving, but rather sewing, even though we said it's not really sewing. Sewing is when you have two pieces of fabric and you stitch them together. So basically, your embroidery, you can't embroider on Shabbos. If you thought it's a long Shabbos day, I'm bored, and I finally figured out what to do, because Oreg is creating fabric, and Toifer is attaching two fabrics, and you say, now's my chance to embroider. I could spend my whole Shabbos embroidering, and basically, you want to give a lamdus based on the Gemara and Yuma and Daf Ayin Beis that weaving is different than embroidery. So Reb Chaim would say no. Weaving and Hilchos Shabbos, weaving and embroidering are the same. The Menucha Nechaina says it is weaving. Rabbi Yamin Zilber says it is weaving. But Reb Nissim Karelitz and Reb Meir Bransdorfer say that it is sewing. So either way, you can't do it. Why you can't do it, that is up to question. Now, this might be our last Shimru until after the summer here in America. We'll see. We'll send out a message. We already did 19 malachas. We're about halfway through. We started this after Sukkot, so if we continue in Elul, Bez Hashem will be able to complete. Hashem should give us siyata d'shmaya to complete it all. I want to wish everybody a wonderful Rosh Chodesh, Chodesh Tammuz, which is Tammuz is Rosh Tevois Zman Matan Torasenu. You say, why is it Zman Matan Torasenu? Because even though Moshe Rabbeinu got the luchos on Shavuos, but he didn't bring down the Torah until 40 days later, which is in the Chodesh Tammuz. So it's the time of Zman Matan Torasenu, and then Moshe broke the luchos, and the Chazal say when Moshe broke the luchos, it brought Shikha into the world, and therefore Tammuz also stands for Zichru Toras Moshe. So may HaKadosh Baruch Hu help us remember everything we learned, and may this month be a true Zman Matan Torasenu. Wishing everyone a wonderful Shabbos and Chodesh Haba Aleinu L'Tova. Have a great day. Kol Tov. Bye-bye.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.